You're very welcome back now. Recent drug-related deaths and the emergence of the U4 drug has brought the dangers of synthetic drugs and Ireland's drug policies to the fore. Dr. Garrett McGovern, who specialises in drug and alcohol addiction, joins us now to discuss this topic in more detail. Doctor, you're very welcome this morning. It was funny there, I was chatting to you and I was saying, which drug causes the most deaths in this country? Which one do we have the most problems with? And you actually said alcohol, and I was like, well, there we go. Very good point. Yeah. But let's put that to one side because it is legal, and let's talk about illegal drugs in this country. Is heroin still the drug that causes the most deaths in this country?
Well, it's changing, but certainly in terms of drug-related deaths, heroin, if you look at the statistics and the coroner's report, certainly is coming back as definitely a drug that's has a high mortality. And a lot of this has to do with the lack of access to treatment for people who need it. So if you don't get treatment and you have a heroin problem, your risk of death is huge. And
I was actually very shocked to see this, we have the third highest number of deaths as a result of drug taking in Europe.
Yeah, it is very, very high.
Why is this the case? How are we failing so badly? Or...
Well, I think we've decided to try and police this, and I think if you look at, you know, the law enforcement leg of any drug strategy, it doesn't seem to have the effect that people want it to have, which is to protect people, particularly young people, and maybe to deter them from taking drugs. It doesn't seem to work. The rates at which people use drugs doesn't seem to change. And in actual fact, what happens, the stricter drug laws tend to be, it tends to have unintended consequences, because people are forced onto drug markets to buy drugs that are very, very dangerous, unknown purity, unknown quantities. And we've decided we can't give safety advice on that. So we have a kind of a just say no approach, which really is very limited in its effectiveness. We can't give advice on safety in the way we can with alcohol. We haven't got it quite right with alcohol, but at least you know when you go into a pub or a outlet store, you know pretty much what you're buying. And you don't know that with drugs.
But you know it's inherently bad for you.
You do, absolutely right. But, you know, when we look at I was really quite shocked by the death recently of that young lad in Cork.
Actually, yeah, let's talk about these synthetic drugs, because it's called U4. I mean, it means nothing to me, I have to say. It's a world that I am so ignorant of. So enlighten us as to the world of synthetic drugs and how they're different and possibly more dangerous than the ones we might be more familiar with.
Well, a lot of these synthetic drugs have been, you know, made in labs in Asia, what we call clandestine labs. And basically what they've done is they've tapped into this drug market. There's a lot of money. There's billions and billions made every year in this market. And what people are now doing is they're now producing these drugs. A lot of them, to be quite honest with you, Sinead, I haven't heard of. The list is as long as your arm. You're never going to be able to ban all these drugs for the simple reason they change little aspects of it to kind of try and circumvent the laws. Some of these things are being sold on the internet. I think in relation to the death in Cork of this U47700, my understanding is, and I don't want to preempt any inquiries, police inquiries or coroner's inquiries, but my understanding is that that wasn't the drug that young lad intended to take. My understanding is from reading media reports, I don't know how true these are, that it was cocaine that he was going to take, which is worrying in itself, a 16-year-old having access to cocaine. And once you take this drug, because it's a powerful opiate painkiller, he wouldn't have had any tolerance to opiates. And when you don't have tolerance to opiates, I mean, I treat people every day who have huge tolerance to opiates, and they survive taking heroin on top of things like methadone. But you will not survive this. It's much more powerful than methadone, much more powerful than morphine. So death is very, very highly likely if you get this drug.
So, Garrett, if our just say no approach isn't working, would you be an advocate of decriminalisation?
Absolutely. I mean, my views are very well...
Does it work? Can we point to other countries where decriminalisation has worked? We can.
We can look at Portugal. Portugal decriminalised drugs in 2001. And what it showed was that they treated it as a health issue rather than a law enforcement issue. And what was found through all of that was that actually people used less drugs and the death rate relating to drugs decreased. And the reason we feel it decreased was there was an avenue to educate people in a different way than we educate people, and particularly young people. I mean, the way we educate young people is very much a patronising way. Young people are intelligent, they're bright, and patronising them doesn't work. You really, really need to educate them and speak on their level. And if young people are taking drugs, we need to find out more about that. You know, in an ideal world, nobody would take drugs and we wouldn't have this problem, but people do.
Would you advocate decriminalisation of all classes of drugs, from heroin down to cannabis?
Well, let's just piece it out, because this is a very thorny issue, and I know there are a lot of people at home who will be thinking, particularly parents, you know, God, what's that mean? Does it mean you can go into a shop and buy it? I don't mean that at all. There are simple ways of starting. There is, for instance, a very active student union group, Sensible Drug Policies, SSDP, which are educating youngsters for a start, and they're talking about, you know, decriminalising drugs. But if you were able to decriminalise, just as at a basic, you would save an awful lot of law enforcement money. So that means that if you're caught with drugs, you don't get and this is the Portuguese model, you don't go through the criminal justice system. If you have a problem, you go through the health system. So you save money in terms of that. There is another way around this. Heroin, let's just take heroin, for instance. There are clinics in Australia, Switzerland, Holland, and there's been trials in the UK on giving heroin users, these are otherwise difficult to treat heroin users, heroin. And what it has shown is they've used less street heroin. So there's a medicalised model for prescribing heroin that could well dent the illicit market. We're moving in the right direction in Ireland. We're talking about decriminalising small amounts of drugs along the lines. Minister Aodhán Reardon, when he was Minister for Drugs, he's put this in place, and also opened up injecting rooms.
I was about to say to you, that's a very contentious subject, isn't it? People feel very uncomfortable about it.
They do.
But you believe it genuinely works and it would genuinely go some way to solving the problem?
I do, because we're talking about, just to be very clear, in injecting rooms, we're talking about places where drug users...
A safe place for people to inject drugs.
And not dispose of their paraphernalia haphazardly. We want to clean up the streets. Nobody wants to be walking down, you know, Dublin City, Temple Barn, to see needles lying around the place. So we need, you know, good bins to be able to dispose of those. But also we can bring people into supervised injecting rooms. There's a bit of dignity, because I know for a lot of people, you know, if you read many of the articles, people use the J word and all sorts of words, who cares about them. There's a knock-on effect for society, because we need to make this a little bit more dignified, and we can't have people injecting in streets and just hoping that it's out of sight, out of mind. So it'll also bring people into treatment, because these people who are injecting clearly are not getting proper treatment, and it'll be able to link them in.
We don't have the facilities in this country to offer people the treatment that they need. Isn't that the reality?
In Dublin, we're not too bad. Outside
but once you
Dublin,
step outside of Dublin,
it's awful. Yeah,
there's nothing on offer to those in rural areas.
It is.
And not even rural areas, in major towns around the country.
Every major town is affected by this. And the worrying thing, Sinead, is that the scope of drugs now, we're moving beyond opiates. A lot of these neuropsychoactive drugs, really we don't know an awful lot about them. And, you know, that's completely undertreated. I mean, it's under-detected, never mind undertreated. So we have a real problem. I think, you know, before I came on, you were talking about freshening it up. I think it's a good way of looking at it. I think we do need to freshen it up. I think we're going in the right direction. It's painfully slow.
What would you do from a legislative perspective? If you could do one thing, decriminalise?
I decriminalise straight away, yeah, absolutely.
OK, Gareth, thank you very much for that. I must bring you back. It's a very interesting topic. Do let us know your thoughts on that subject at home as well. Now, coming up...